Citizens of the Capitol, it is time for another episode of the Capitol Wrestling Podcast with your hosts, Darnell Mitchell and Dustin Smothers. This week, the guys are reviewing episode 56 of Capitol Television, featuring the matches from Mystery Dream Match 3000 between Juba and Just Neff, as well as Robert Locke versus Joe Keys. Darnell also sits down with Capitol newcomer Magnum CK to discuss his career resurgence and many other topics. Dustin and Darnell also discuss the upcoming show in Connecticut in conjunction with the Just Incredible documentary, as well as June 2nd's The Grey album when we return to the Capitol Auditorium. So without any further ado, citizens of the Capitol, let's start the show.
All right, citizens of the Capitol, rejoice, for it is that time again. It is Wednesday, and that means it's time for another episode of the Capitol Wrestling Podcast. I'm your host, the Metal Mouth of Midwest Wrestling, Dustin Smothers, and I am joined, as always, by my good brother from another mother, the fabulous fashionista of Brooklyn, New York. I am talking about the one and only Darnell Mitchell. Darnell, how are we doing?
Bonjour, how are you?
Not too bad. It's spring for about 48 hours here in Iowa. We went straight from winter to summer. And right now, got a big old thunderstorm going outside here on Tuesday evening, so it's the best sleeping weather, and I'm really good. How are you?
I'm all right. Getting ready to move in the next week, so I will no longer be the fabulous fashionista of Brooklyn. I'll be the fabulous fashionista, hopefully, of Washington Heights. So,
all right. Well, you have to keep me
which
posted.
means nothing to you. But
nothing at all. If you would have said Queens or maybe...
It's in Manhattan, so it's just...
Okay. Can we just say Manhattan? The fabulous fashionista of Manhattan, New York?
Yep, that works.
I like it. That sounds better. I feel like you need to lean into the Manhattan more. It's been a pretty cool day for me. My son had his kindergarten spring concert this evening, and they did some songs that were straight out of Westworld, so that was nice. I'm really enjoying that show, and I have to be honest, I got kind of psyched up when the 6th grade band played Jerry the King Lawler's theme tonight. That caught me off guard. I didn't even know that was a thing. I learned tonight that song's called The Great Gates of Kiev.
Oh, so like Connor was singing and stuff like that?
Connor was singing, but he's not in band yet. So like it's a smaller school, so they do the whole elementary there for the concert. But it was really fun. I always enjoy being able to go to those, and I'll tell you, there's nothing more objectively funny than watching a 7-year-old or an 8-year-old who clearly has no interest in singing fake their way through a concert.
Oh yeah, I those videos are hilarious. You can just see them just like, they don't care.
There's this one kid tonight, I swear to God, he was on another plane of existence. He kept checking in and checking out every 10 seconds. It was a really good time. Alyssa got really mad at me for talking about it, and so she hears this. She's probably going to call me out for calling out a 7-year-old. But that is not why we're here today. We are here because Capitol Wrestling, it's a whole nother year now. We're officially into year 2. We had Mystery Dream Match 3000 this past weekend. A lot of people, a lot of buzz coming out of this show. I didn't get to watch it because I had some prior commitments, but I did hear there was some issues with the Twitch stream. But that's okay. No issues there, because guess what? This means that all of us get to actually experience, week by week, the story unfold from Mystery Dream Match 3000. And Darnell, I didn't even realize this, but you were unfortunately under the weather as well, so you weren't there for the show. So this is going to be a really interesting next few weeks, because it's not very often that we don't know what's going to happen on the Capitol Television show.
Absolutely. And of course, like, we could have asked, Matthew and kind of figured out what was happening. But I was sick, and I ended up not being able to go. I was really, really bad about it, because it turns out it was a great show. It's also Damien was there, and I know yeah, I've been asking him to come to a Capitol show for like the past 6 months, and the show he goes to
is the one you can't attend.
The one I miss. The one I cannot attend. Excuse me. But I was pleasantly surprised when Matthew messaged me Saturday night with a picture of the stage that I didn't really get to fully understand until I saw Capitol TV.
Yeah. This week's episode, we had episode 56. We got the Juba versus Just Neff and the Joe Keys versus Robert Locke matches. But yeah, the first thing that grabbed my attention is the brand new set, amazing fluorescent lights, that Capitol logo that you see at the beginning of Capitol Television every week. A lot of different light rigs, different things going on in the arena, and just overall, the vibe in the Capitol Auditorium has changed, and changed for the better. This is things were great. Now they're even better. And so this is just fantastic. I'm blown away by the production quality and the continued, the way Matthew and Marcus strive to continue to upgrade and improve the product. They are not complacent individuals. They want Capitol Wrestling to be the best product out there. And I'll tell you right now, they're making it, they're setting the bar pretty high for independent wrestling right now.
They aren't just the bar, they set the bar. I think that's a good way to put it, especially when you say they're not complacent. They're not, they're always looking for something new. They're always looking for something interesting, whether it be from their backstage promotions. We actually got to see Ashley. Ashley I met at Anniversary, and she sold me a great slice of pizza from Pizza Republic, and now Ashley's doing backstage interviews, from new wrestlers to new designs to new everything. They are an example of a company. We are an example of a company that is always striving to be better and to grow, which I love.
It truly is, and I mean, when you look at what they've accomplished, and we've accomplished, it's so weird for me to say we've. I feel so, I'm out here in Iowa, but yes, I am part of the Capitol team, and it's an honor and a privilege to be a part of this team. So it's incredible to look at what we have accomplished in the first year. They've got television in Minnesota, television in New York, they've got YouTube, they've got Twitch, they've got all these different affiliates streaming their show. And yet they don't just sit back and rest on their laurels. They're serious. Matthew and Marcus are very serious about presenting the best professional wrestling on the independent circuit. And I'll tell you, it just keeps getting better. And Darnell, we had 2 big matches this week on Capitol Television. What did you think of the Juba versus Just Neff match?
Before we get into that, I did want to say Capitol TV started off the best way possible.
Oh, yes.
With a close-up of Swipe Right Joe Keys.
Fantastic promo.
I know that I talk about my husband, that he doesn't know this yet, Ronnie Burton, but like Joe Keys is the sleaziest, most adorable person I've ever seen in my entire life. He's technically undefeated, because he's lost matches, but he was never pinned or submitted in single matches. What better way to start off Capitol TV than some sleaziness? But yeah, so we got to see Juba against Just Neff. Neff was making his Capitol Wrestling debut, I believe. I really like Neff. Neff is actually from here in the city, and he tried his best. He worked on the legs as much as possible for Juba, but Juba, especially with those incredibly loud chest slaps, was relentless. But we were also we were graced with the presence of Matthew Ryan Shapiro, who came out to do commentary with Harry and Steven. As he was clearly looking for somebody new to join the Bastards.
Yeah, this was a very interesting situation. Matthew never comes out without a motive. We'll put it that way. And so I'm going to be very interested to see where this goes with him.
Yeah, I'm very interested to see. After the match, of course, Juba won with the 1-2-3. Sorry, Just Neff. You just lost, but that was cute. As long as I make myself laugh. I find that way too funny. Matthew Ryan Shapiro. Matthew Ryan Shapiro, of course, gets into the ring. Tries to offer Juba a spot, but doesn't do it in the nicest way possible. And Juba answers with a spinning clothesline. The question is even though the Juba answer that way, will Matthew, will Shapiro continue to look out for Juba? Is he done looking at Juba? Does he want to try again looking at Juba? Is Juba actually still thinking about it? There's so many things that can happen from this.
Well, and like I said, I mentioned, obviously it's going to be interesting to see where this goes. My assumption here is if I was Matthew, I would be done with trying to court Juba. But what's interesting to me is that Matthew is out there looking. You've got Paul Jourdain, you've got Ken Dixon, you've got some of the biggest, meanest, toughest guys in the Capitol. I mean, it shouldn't surprise you he went after Juba. Obviously didn't go his way, but I got to be honest, I think at any moment we could see another member of the Bastards. I think Matthew is motivated to continue to improve the ranks of the Bastards and continue to prove why they are one of the greatest and most dominant factions in the Capitol.
Yeah, they're on their way. Them and Danger Sanctuary are kind of running the game, so to speak.
Sort of an arms race right now in the Capitol.
Well, like Fall Out Boy said, this ain't a scene; it's a goddamn arms race. Sorry, I was listening to that song on repeat the other day.
Gotta love some Fall Out Boy. That's one band that actually I probably don't admit enough that I actually enjoy. So yes.
Their first couple of albums are really good. Pete Wentz is did I ever tell you this? I'm friends with the bassist from Autumn to Ashes. So I had a crush on him when I was 13, and then apparently he worked at J. Crew as the merchandising manager for 10 years, and he came to our store and I was like, man, you look so familiar. Then I realized I had a crush on him when I was 13. And him and I became really good friends. But he always told me how awful Pete Wentz was as a person. I was like, oh, that's really sad. It makes me, want to eat some sugar and go down. It looks when I go dance.
We're stealing our good brother Kevin's gimmick from the Pro Wrestling Mothership. Do you agree with that, Darnell? Do you think Matthew was this a one-time situation? Maybe he thought Juba would be aligned with him, or do you think he's going to be looking?
I think he's going to be looking, but I think he's going to focus on Juba. Juba has had a hell of a time here in the Capitol Wrestling, and I think that Matthew kind of surrounds himself with guys who definitely can hold their own. And if there's someone that can hold their own, it'd be Juba. I also wouldn't be mad to see someone like Swipe Right in there.
Right.
Swipe Right, again, technically undefeated. Isn't that someone you want on your team?
Absolutely.
So here's looking to see where he puts his feelers out, so to speak.
Well, you talked about the man being undefeated. We'd also see him go one-on-one with Robert Locke on this episode of Capitol Wrestling Television. And Darnell, was the outcome a swipe right or a swipe left for Joe Keys here tonight?
It's always a swipe right on Joe Keys. Always. I did love Robert Locke's pre-match promo with Candice Cordelia. Shout out to Candice. If you haven't heard the episode from 2 weeks ago, I believe, she was our guest on the podcast, and she's adorable. Shout out to Robert Locke for saying, Candice, thank you for wearing flats, because Candice is pretty damn tall. I haven't heard much of Robert Locke, so I was really, really excited to see what he was going to bring to the Capitol and bring to the ring. And he was very, very fun to watch. This was a very back and forth, even-paced match, even-killed match. Kind of straightforward, no frills, no games. That is until Swipe Right raked the eyes at the end of the match to get that swinging neck breaker off of them, the second rope for the 1, 2, 3. But Swipe Right continues to look impressive in the Capitol, and it was only a matter of time before he's wrestling for the Sapphire Championship.
Oh, you've got to assume so, absolutely. He's got a lot of momentum behind him right now, and that's the great thing. We talk about the heavyweight title picture. Lots and lots of contenders. Lots of contenders lining up for that Sapphire title. Juanita better be safe. And honestly, I don't know if Mempho Mofo is still the champion. We obviously haven't seen the match from Mr. Dream Match 3000, and like you guys, the listeners at home, maybe who weren't there, we're going to keep it that way, I think, this next few weeks. But the Sapphire title picture's heating up. The tag team title picture's heating up. It may only be a matter of time before we have a women's champion in the Capitol. I know there's a lot of women lining up for an opportunity with Capitol Wrestling as well. So a great episode of television this week. Obviously, next week we'll see more from Mystery Dream Match 3000. But we're going to look ahead a little bit to next month. We do know that the next show is called The Grey Album.
Yeah.
It is a great name. I really enjoy that.
Yeah, it's super, super great. It's I think it's really, really cool. I think Matthew and Marcus kind of always outdo themselves with the names of these shows. And that's a show on June 2nd, I believe.
Yep, June 2nd, right there at 301 Garden Street in Hoboken, New Jersey.
Yes, but let's also not forget, during the show, there was a preview for the amazing, just incredible documentary. Did I say that word correctly?
Documentary, yes.
Okay. And actually, they're going to be filming, apparently, a bit of it in Connecticut.
Yes.
So that's going to be the show before the Grey Album. That's on May 20th, 41 Veterans Drive, New Britain, Connecticut. Doors open at 6:30. So yeah, this is Capitol's first foray outside of the New York tri-state area. Again, in Connecticut, there's going to be Teddy Hart making his Capitol debut, Homicide, Paul Jourdain, Matt McIntosh, Nyla Rose, Karen Q, Vanity, Ariella Nix. That's going to be...
She's got new shirts, too. If you guys haven't seen them, you should get a hold of her. I know she's taking pre-orders right now for her brand new shirt.
For Ariella? She's amazing.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's going to be a cool little thing, that's going to be a part of Capitol Wrestling, and I'm really, really excited to see how that turns out.
Well, and to me, this is great because this is the continued evolution of Capitol Wrestling. Obviously, we're kind of accustomed to one show a month or, one show every 6 weeks or so. And so it's really cool to see that, hopefully this summer this is the sign of things to come. Maybe we'll get a few more shows than we're used to this summer. And that's the thing. If, year 2, you got to up that ante and continue to improve upon what you've done in year 1. And I'll tell you right now, if you're a citizen of the Capitol, you're a fan of what we're doing here, you're going to be so thrilled with the way things go in 2018. I can say that with 100% certainty, Darnell.
Absolutely. The only way from here is up. Yeah. And I cannot wait to see what the Capitol has in store.
Well, now, speaking of what the Capitol has in store, we've got a really, really big interview this week. We're keeping it short here on the front end because you've got a very, very great conversation for us this week, Darnell. Can you tell us what we're about to hear?
Yeah, so if people don't recognize this by now, I am the one that kind of picks who we're going to interview for the show, and it's just kind of like, I kind of pick the people who I think are just fascinating and interesting when I see them. And as I say that, don't worry, I'm probably coming around to you, whoever you are. But one of the people I saw that I thought was super, super cool was Magnum CK, who made his Capital Wrestling debut with an anniversary against Hot Dog. I forget who his tag team partner was. Oh, homie, I can't think of his name. Against Hot Dog Starks and the Abominable CPA. But I thought Magnum CK just had such an interesting look, had an interesting everything about him. And I was like, I've got to get that guy on the podcast. So, like we always kind of strive for a good 15, 20-minute podcast. And 45 minutes later, I was like, oh, wait, we've got to wrap this up, man. He was a joy to talk to, an absolute joy.
All right, well, let's get right to it. This is the interview, and we'll be back afterwards to wrap things up for this week's edition of the Capital Wrestling Podcast.
Citizens of the Capital, it is I, Darnell Mitchell, the fabulous fashionista of Brooklyn, New York, and I am here on the Capital Wrestling Podcast with an incredible talent. I'm here with Magnum CK. Hi, how are you?
You said you're here with an incredible talent. I started looking around to see if someone else was behind me or something.
No, it's clearly you. You debuted for Capital at, I believe, an anniversary. Correct?
Yeah, that's right. It was funny because I had a great time. I was excited, and as soon as they told me I was wrestling Hot Dog, I was all in. I mean, in all sincerity, I was very excited just for the pictures alone. But I was backstage, and it's their anniversary show, so they were doing all the we made it a year and all this stuff, and I'm like, I'm like the new guy. Like, I'm excited for everybody, but I'm like, I really did nothing to get you guys here.
But you got to think of it the way as you continue to help grow Capital Wrestling and add something new. I hadn't seen you wrestle before, and I was blown away by you. Man, like right. Sincerely, when you came out, your outfit was amazing.
Well, that's the deal. I kind of stumbled across that look and the whole cape and everything. And it's funny how much easier it's made everything in the sense that when I walk out, people kind of get an idea of what I am right off the bat.
No, and that's perfect. I think that's, when I go to the shows, I try to invite someone new each time. Yeah. And that show, it was my friend Nate who watches wrestling and his girlfriend who knows wrestling. Yeah. But immediately when you came out, they were like, I think he's not a good guy. And I was like, that's great. That's great that immediately they were like, all right, I already know what to expect from him. And one thing that I noticed about you, which actually I guess correlates to what you also do, is your facial expressions are amazing. And I was drawn to everything you were doing, and I could read everything you were doing. You do theater, is that correct?
Yeah, well, that's what I was going to say. I think that's where a lot of that comes from. I've been doing theater. I started doing theater almost, it's been over 15 years ago now. And in that time, I've done a lot of different things, but I've been able to, luckily, I've been cast in a lead role in over 30 plays and musicals. And so when I think about just performance experience, I mean, that's tens of thousands of hours because, it takes 3, sometimes 4 months to put together a play or a musical, especially a musical. And so, you rehearse 20 to 30 hours a week, and that's one of the things that you learn. And any good wrestling teacher will teach you that as well. But one of the things you learn in the theater is they have to be able to know how you feel about something all the way in the back row of the balcony. They have to be able to read your face. and it's different than film acting and things like that, where things are much more in the eyes or nuance. But wrestling is just live theater. It's a stage, so you have to use your body and use your face to get that message across. And unfortunately, I think for a while there, it was kind of a lost art. But one thing I've noticed with the influx of kind of the influence of New Japan Pro Wrestling, I think if you watch any New Japan show, people can say what they want about that style and it being, rough and all that, or kicking out of things 100 times. But, whatever. I don't really feel that that's a problem. But one thing you'll notice is the face, the takes to the camera, the takes to the audience, the faces, when someone's, you can feel the passion, or the surprise or whatever. And I think that influence with the influx of New Japan being popular again is kind of changing the way independent wrestlers are performing. So I'm hoping to see more of that. And I like to. It's funny because at this point I've been just performing in theater and everything so long that I don't even think about it. Like, it just kind of happens because someone will say, like, "Oh man, I love that thing you did," and I'm like, "Oh, thanks. I don't even remember what you're talking about."
You're like, "Oh yeah, it was awesome. I had been thinking about it forever." And inside, you're just like, "All right." Well, you said you think that it's a lost art? Why do you think that people started to gravitate away from using their face, from catering to the crowd?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think there are a lot of things go into that, and I think there was this weird transition in wrestling where it went from being, kind of these old school, I guess now you'd consider, because I had the benefit of, I've had 2 careers in wrestling. I started originally in 2003, 2004 when I first turned 18, and I had a 4 or 5 year career then. And then I went off and I did a bunch of theater, and then I came back about 2.5 years ago. So I much prefer wrestling the way it is now as to it was when my first time around in the early mid 2000s or whatever. It's weird. I feel like a bunch of guys, and I say guys in the 2018 sense of, male and female, just people, I suppose, it's the bad habit. Mm-hmm. But I think people were simulating wrestling. Right, so it's like I could like I did in my living room. I would watch Roddy Piper or Ric Flair, and then I would kind of simulate what they were doing. But I didn't really understand the when and the where and the why and the how. And I'm not trying to say that everybody was just a backyard wrestler. I just mean that I don't think that people were diving into the art of like, hey, this is a performance, and it's cool that you can do these amazing athletic things. But if you don't set them up with a story, it doesn't matter. It's like starting out a movie with the most expensive, tremendous, amazing action sequence and special effects sequence of all time. But that's not the way movies go, because you build to that, because otherwise I don't care. Like, you could do 10 flips in a row off the top, and that's great. But if I don't care who you are or why you're doing it, then you're wasting your time. Now, I think we're entering a period in wrestling where more and more people are starting to understand that, and I certainly don't claim to be the only person who understands that. But I think instead of, because there was this blowback, and you might remember there was this blowback of like, oh, all these spot monkeys, they'd call them, and all things. I never felt that way. I always thought, my God, that is so amazing. Like, that's so impressive. Like, I've had to do fight scenes in theater and stuff. And when I see like Will Ospreay and Ricochet, I'm like, well done, guys. Like, holy cow. Like, you're a real life. It's like the Matrix, but it's real. There's no cut, there's no second take. So I think that's all impressive. And I think what guys are starting to figure out is that, okay, we're the best athletes in the world, and we're better athletes than have ever been in this sport. So now if we add that with the theatrical side, in the sense of here's why we're doing this, or here's why you should care if I get up on this guy, then it's money. And I think you're seeing that, with a lot of if you watch, I don't get to keep up a ton with a lot of things, but I see it on the independent circuit on shows I'm on, and I see it in Ring of Honor and stuff like that. Which is kind of the head of the snake, for the indies, New Japan or Ring of Honor. Everything else kind of comes after that. And I think the trend is, oh my God, we're amazing athletes. Now let's tell stories.
Yeah. I think in kind of corresponding with that, I think one thing that is incredible is someone who has a great character and gimmick. I think that sometimes you can watch a wrestling match and you think the person's a great character, but as they wrestle, they just kind of wrestle, if that makes any sense, instead of wrestling as a character. I think you do a very good job of always kind of being in the zone. What helped? What was your thought process about creating your character, the Magnum CK?
Well, a million factors. I mean, I would say that the key, you kind of said the key of it, which is to stay in the moment, and that's where I talked about like the facial expressions and stuff that I don't have to actually manufacture and think about. They all come because I'm staying in the moment, and that a lot of that I would attribute not only to acting and acting training, but I lived in Chicago for a while and I studied at Second City for improv and other things, but mostly improv. And that is the ultimate. You have to inject yourself into this moment and never leave it until it's over. And that has helped me when I came back to wrestling, I realized how much of a theatrical performance and how much improv it really is. And improv training, just they drill that into you of like, stay in the moment, pay attention, connect with the other people, connect with the audience. You have to be listening. And it's just something that becomes second nature, after a while. And I can attribute where it all clicked for me was a gentleman you may or may not have heard of named Gabe Sapolsky. he just might have a future in this business. I'm not sure. He just might be a genius. I don't know. But I had the good fortune of having a match in front of Gabe and William Regal. And
I love William Regal.
Me too. And I learned more from William Regal in a 2-hour, sit down talk than I've learned in 10 years of my life. But one of the notes that Gabe Sapolsky gave, he gave me a lot of wonderful feedback and a lot of positive feedback. And he noted like, I got the stamp of approval from Gabe. He's like, you have wonderful charisma and your selling is great and all that, blah, blah, blah. And he said, one thing that stuck out to me was your work in the ring and the way you carry yourself in the ring does not match your entrance or your cape. And I was like, what? Like, what does that mean? And I mulled it over. And of course, it was my wife, who's the smartest person who lives in my house, who put it all together for me, just like she always does, because, we're inside the wrestling bubble. So we only think in the terms of this little bubble, but she's an outsider. So she was like, what he means is, and she kind of explained it. And then it all clicked. It was like, what I was doing was I was having this big grand entrance and this big slow moving kind of theatrical entrance. And then I would take off my cape and the bell would ring. And then I was just a wrestler. It was just, you did all the wrestling things and you did the circle and the lock up and you grabbed your wrist, and all that. And just all the crap. And then when a guy puts you in an arm bar, you slap your shoulder for some reason that nobody knows why you do that. All the wrestling tropes, and she's like, he's saying that your entrance is unlike anything else, so the rest of the way you carry yourself the rest of the match needs to be the same way. And I was like, oh. So the next weekend, I just matched my entrance, which was I slowed everything down in the ring. I was, just kind of the pompous whatever, and then just slowly started, it kind of clicked and slowly started morphing from there. So that everything I did in the ring matched that persona that I set up in the entrance. And again, it takes someone who I would consider a wrestling genius like Gabe. And this is no butt kissing. I don't, if I ever work for him, I'd be happy to do it. If I don't, then that's fine too. He just knows what he's talking about. And I attribute it to that. He really set my whole style on fire, and it was like, oh wow, okay, that makes perfect sense now. So I just think the second I walk through that curtain, I just need to keep that same air about myself until the end. Now, I said, that kind of slower paced style, but then when I turn it on and it's toward the end of the match and the guy's really ping ponging me around, well, then it really means something because it feels different. It's like, okay, well, this guy's been cool and collected and in control the whole time. Now he doesn't seem to know which way's up. Like, this is different. Like, wow, he's in trouble here,
Yeah. So, I mean, you're talking about Gabe and William. Let's kind of go back. How did you first get into wrestling? Did you watch it a lot when you were a kid? And you're also, how old are you? You've got to be
I just turned 32.
Okay, yeah, we're the exact same age. So, yeah, I guess, I mean, when did you start watching wrestling and, like, Who were the people you were looking up to when you were young?
Well, I've talked about this here and there, but I've watched it my whole life because my uncle was a wrestler, and he just kind of exposed me to wrestling. My earliest memories are of the 1989 SummerSlam. And thinking that Zeus was going to kill Hulk Hogan, and that was back in the day when pay-per-view wasn't exactly easy to come by. So I had to wait until the magazine came out like 3 months later, to find out what happened. And I would go to my uncle's house and watch pay-per-views when I could, or if I went over there for a week or two in the summer. I would beg him to play old Memphis tapes and Tommy Rich, and and I was able to scrounge together the money every month for like PWI magazine. So I knew all about which, if you remember, they covered mostly the NWA and WCW for the most part. So I knew all about Ric Flair and Sting and all those guys. And then I finally got TV, and I would watch the Saturday night programs on TBS and everything. But my first pro wrestling main event that I ever saw live was one of my uncle's shows when I was 5, and that was Wahoo McDaniel against Ivan Koloff in a Russian. It was either a Russian chain or some kind of strap. I think it might have been a strap, come to think of it, but it was a wild, bloody brawl, So I just remember watching that and being hooked. And thinking like, God, I love this. And I grew up kind of in the middle of nowhere, and I didn't have any neighbors or friends, really. I was kind of a poor kid that kind of lived out in the rural area. And so wrestling was my best friend, man. Like, I just it's what I thought about 24 hours a day, and my wife could tell you it's still kind of that way, for better or for worse. But I read the magazines. I made my own magazine. I would cut out pictures and write my own articles. I recorded my own wrestling shows where I did commentary with my wrestling figures, and I had these hot angles and all these.
That's adorable. And where is this? Where are you from?
Well, I was born just outside of Ohio, right across the river. I could see Ohio from my house in West Virginia.
Oh, is that like Russia too?
Yeah.
No, nothing. Keep going.
Like how Sarah Palin could see Russia, yeah. But I always say that because people hear West Virginia and they think like, oh, coal mining country and all that. Like it was not a real, genuine like I've wrestled in genuine West Virginia. It was not. It was basically just like Ohio. It was just rural area, and. But I made my own wrestling games. I made like a role-playing game that was like for wrestling, and then I never got to play it with anybody. But I have the whole cast of characters, so I just always grew up with it, and it was just my happy place, man. So we finally got like a satellite dish right when the Monday Night Wars kicked off. So I would tape Raw and Nitro, and I would watch one of them on the night, and then the next day I would watch the other one when I got home from school. And I just had a huge collection of taped wrestling. I would save up my money to buy blank tapes. I would just watch over and over and over, and then when I would go visit my uncle, he would explain everything to me. We'd be watching wrestling, and he would tell me like why they're doing that or why it makes sense, and the ins and the outs. So I kind of always knew the deal with wrestling, like I learned pretty young that it wasn't exactly like,
So kayfabe was never really a thing for you. You kind of knew.
It's funny because I just ran into Mick Foley on a show in Toronto not that long ago, and I didn't really know what to say to him. And he's a very approachable guy. But I just told him, I was like, listen, I grew up around wrestling. And so, you hang out after the show and you know the deal. You see the bad guys eating leftover hot dogs from the concession stand with the good guys, and you kind of put it together pretty fast. And I told him, I was like, I always knew the deal, but like, I thought Cactus Jack was the real deal. Like, even, I was like, all this other stuff might be, predetermined, but Cactus Jack's real, man. And I think he really appreciated that.
So you're growing up, you're watching it. Did your uncle ever kind of instill in you, kind of like support you the idea of potentially being a wrestler, or was that just still something that you as a young person didn't even cross your mind?
And my uncle was the only one I ever really told that I wanted to be a wrestler, because I was embarrassed, because where I came from, you didn't follow your dreams. It was just kind of a very poor environment, and I'm not putting blame on anyone. It's just that's just what the circumstance was. And he was the only person I'd ever really mentioned that I wanted to wrestle, because I knew he was the only person that would not pass much judgment on me, and we didn't live in the same town. So as I got into high school, we didn't talk as much. And I actually, for my senior project, I had this psychology class with my psychology and history teacher named Mr. Dennis, and I really liked him a lot. And for some reason, so we had this project of write about what you want to do after you graduate. And for some reason, I just got this wild hair, and I thought, I'm going to write about how I want to be a pro wrestler. And I wrote this whole big essay about why I loved wrestling, why I wanted to be one, why I thought I would be a good pro wrestler. And I cut out pictures of Ric Flair and I pasted it in there, and this is well after wrestling was cool to like. Like, this was 2003, whatever.
Yeah.
4, and it was like not a cool thing anymore. So I turned it in, and I remember being like, "Oh man, you idiot! He's gonna give you an F." I immediately regretted it. I always liken it to on Office Space when Peter at the end he slides underneath the door of his boss, that they stole the money.
Oh yeah.
Comes back and is like, "No, why'd I do that?" I had that exact same feeling. And then the next Monday, I went in and he had our papers graded and he handed it back. And on the last page, he gave me an A and it said, "Chris, somebody has to be a pro wrestler. Why not you?" And I was like, oh, that is such a perfect mantra. And I've shared that with every I do a lot of directing these days, and every cast I've ever had, every staff, I've always give them that same speech. And I'll, when I'm teaching and I'm a professor someday, I'm going to have it plastered in my room, somebody has to be one. Why not you? Because that's just the best advice you can give anybody. And then
that's beautiful.
Because he said that, I went to my local wrestling fed, and just one thing led to another, and I was training. I had to hustle because I didn't have any money, and the promoter was a real shyster. And I showed up because I'd met a friend of mine who worked at the movie theater I worked for right after I graduated. He used to work at the movie theater, but he was a local pro wrestler. And he's like, "Dude, just come on Saturday, help us set up the ring before the show, and I'll get you in there." And so I got in there, and then the promoter showed up and got me out of the ring and was like, "Hey, it's going to be $50 for a tryout, and then if we accept you, it's $2,500 for training and all the blah, 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 blah." And I knew it was all a work, and I was just like, "Ah, geez." So then I had an idea, because they only trained once a month at these shows that they did. I was like, "Listen, my parents and my grandparents rather have this old it's a church building from the 19th century. It's this old sturdy church building that's not a church anymore. It's just empty." I was like, "If I can talk them into letting you set up your ring all month, you could have training once a week or multiple times a week, and you can charge however much you want, but I'll hook this up for you if you let me train for free." And of course he jumped on it, and I got to train for 6 or 9 months just every day for free. And so it's just this crash course in wrestling where I'd wrestled 100 matches before I ever had my first actual match in front of a crowd. So that there's always a way, I guess is the message behind that. If you have the will, you can always figure out some way. And lightning just happened to strike on that one.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. And I also want to say you were clearly born in the 70s for saying shyster. So this is when you're 18, 19, because you said 2003, 2004, and then you left wrestling to go into theater. What was that? What made you leave wrestling to
a lot of factors. So I debuted on February 26th. My first actual match was February 26th, and then I wrestled for about 4 solid years, and then I had a year where I was just kind of here and there. I wrestled maybe once a month or so. So I say it's about 5 years, and a lot of things happened. I mean, I had a lot of things happen in my life. It was a tough period because there was a period where I was actually homeless. I didn't have anywhere to live, and I don't mean in the sense that I was living on the street, but I was just bouncing from house to house, friend to friend, trying to not wear out my welcome just because I didn't have anywhere to go, and I didn't really have any. My family kind of left me kind of hanging, and So it was a rough period, but I was hanging on and I was making as many towns as I could. But then I had a group of friends who kind of split up, and not out of a falling out reasons, but a local wrestling federation that kind of kept us all together. It went out of business and disbanded, so we all kind of went different ways in the wind. And I kept trying to make shows. I was driving up to Cleveland, Ohio, which is about a 4-hour drive at the time. For Cleveland All Pro Wrestling, and I was trying to break in there and everything, and I couldn't do it. My car died. I literally I couldn't get to towns, and it was just a bad time. And I was doing the wrong things. I was trying to be the type of wrestler that I thought everybody would want me to be. I was trying to be the wrestler that would land me a job somewhere or whatever, and that's just no way to go about it. And so I was really frustrated in that sense too. And I just had a lot of changes go on, and so I just kind of gravitated away from the wrestling business, and partly out of just depression and other things. And then I went and I auditioned for a play at the local university where I was taking a couple of classes here and there, just kind of wasting my time and money and loans. And I didn't get cast in the play, so I was like, oh, but it led to a better play that I got cast in. But anyway, one play led to another, started leading into musicals, and then I was still doing commentary and stuff for wrestling shows and things like that, so I was still involved in wrestling, but I was just out of the ring, and I convinced myself that, I didn't have what it took to be a wrestler, and wrestling's not what it used to be, and all these bad attitude type of things of like, it used to, I wanted wrestling that I grew up on, and nobody's doing that, and blah, 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 blah. So then, years go by, I met my wife, and she saw how much I love wrestling and was like, why aren't you doing it? And I kind of told her, and she's like, yeah, that's kind of BS. Like, come on, like, you love it, do it. And then through different things, I just realized that I can make my wrestling experience what I want it to be. Okay, so yes, it's not 1988 anymore, but that's not necessarily bad. So what I can do is I can take everything that I love about 1988, mix it in with 2018, and I can package myself as what the wrestler I want to be. And if I'm wrestling some kid who only watches New Japan Pro Wrestling and does all those moves and stuff, well, great. I'll do those with him too, and I'll sell all those moves, but I'm going to sell them like Ted DiBiase. So it's just a testament to just make it your own, and I've been much, 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 much happier. Because even when I first came back, I found myself going down that same hole of being frustrated. And it was about a year and a half back, maybe about a year, and my wife was like, listen, you're spinning your wheels here. Just, don't be afraid to be what you want to be and what you love about wrestling. So she had me name off all the wrestlers I love, which was like Ric Flair, Rick Rude, Piper, Terry Funk, all these guys. And she's like, well, what do you love about them? So I started naming off all that stuff. And she's like, okay, well, do that. And I was like, yeah, but yeah, it's that easy. Okay, wow, I feel stupid. So it's not a matter of like ripping off a bunch of guys, but it's just take that spirit of how they performed and do it my way, And I've had, luckily, the last 6-9 months, I've had a lot of great success and a lot of fun doing it.
Yeah. First of all, your wife sounds awesome. So I wanted to make sure I threw that out. So for you, being in wrestling now and then being a wrestler back in 2003, 2004, there's a lot of, with social media being as prominent as it is, there's a lot of conversations about wrestling not being what it used to be, whether it's behind the scenes or whatever. How do you think wrestling is in 2018? Do you think it's gotten better in a sense of the word, or?
I think
that's a very hard question.
It's a hard question. I think if I could liken my experience to my first time around, I much prefer it this time for a lot of reasons. I'm sure not the least of which is just I have a better attitude and I have a few more years on me. You know how it is when you're young and dumb and hungry. You're easily frustrated, and I'm. Oddly enough, I'm one of the older guys in the locker room these days, even though I'm only 32, but that's a good thing. I'm a calming, positive presence, I think, is the feedback that I get. And I think people are much more open, I remember feeling very ostracized my first time around in wrestling, and feeling like there were a lot of cliques and a lot of clubs and a lot of like, oh, we don't like that guy, shoot on him type of thing, and I don't hear about that happening anymore. And when you do, it's kind of like an eye-rolly thing, like, oh, these old guys sitting over here, like, get out of here, man. And then so instead of fighting with these people or whatever, I just bridge the gap. If I find out that there's somebody who maybe doesn't have the best attitude, I try to, if I have to work with them, I just try to address it in a tactful way. And so I just think things are much more open now, and I think people are a lot more accepting. And one thing that I try to make known is that, because I kind of hate the whole, like, oh, you're an old school guy. And I'm like, yeah, I guess. But, like, my thing is, there's just an art to wrestling. And to me, the art is telling these stories in whatever way that is. And there's no right or wrong way to perform. But it's telling it in a way that looks, that is taken seriously, even if it's comedy, and looks like you're hurting people, but you don't actually hurt people. Like, it's contact. Like, it is. I definitely would call myself a full contact wrestler, in the sense that there are certain places on the human body that you could hit wide open with the proper form, and it doesn't matter. I will clothesline someone in the chest perfectly as hard as I can, and nobody will be hurt, but the crowd will hear the smack, and they'll be like, oh, damn, man. But we're perfectly fine. I can stomp somebody with the flat part of my foot right in the forehead and do it in such a way that looks like I just took his head off. And if he sells it right, and everything, he's not even hurt or anything. So I'm not trying to ruin the business here. I'm sure this is no surprise to anybody. But there's a technique and an art to it, and I just don't want that to be lost. And I think some guys, it takes a little while for them to understand that. But I'm happy to report that it seems like a lot of guys come around to it eventually. In your first year in wrestling, you think you know what you're doing, and you're just out there hurting everybody. And then you get veterans who are like, hey, take it easy, brother. And then you realize, okay, you realize how to make it work. I mean, you can watch any of these guys and girls who go to NXT. Now watch their PWG match, which, and this is nothing disparaging at all. I'm just saying, watch their Super Indie match, their last Super Indie match, and then watch their first WrestleMania match. I know that they get cycled through the WWE system, but like, it's like something clicks, you know what I mean? And they're able to connect with a broader audience. And I think that locker rooms are more open to that these days, where everyone's doing all the cool new stuff that they saw on the New Japan GIF, but they're also understanding that you need to reach that broader audience and get past that. So they're gravitating more toward storytelling and things like that. I hope that makes sense.
It makes complete sense. There's a couple of things I wanted to say about what you said. First of all, we all know, and there are not that many more secrets left in wrestling for most people, just because of social media, because of actual communication between the wrestlers. But I think that when you become older, you start to, for me, I started to love wrestling for a different reason. And so, I mean, like, the stories and the character, to me, is intriguing. But that's also a great point that you made about WWE. I'll always say someone like Sami Zayn, for example, was a fantastic wrestler as El Generico. But if you look at the difference between him as El Generico and him as Sami Zayn in a 5-star match on WWE, in a WWE ring, there's a clear difference between the two. I think we forget that WWE still has some of the best trainers in the world, whether it's a cycle or not. But it's also the idea that everyone needs to learn. There's no perfect anything. No one's perfect at anything. There's always room to learn.
Well, I think you made my point even better than I did, because it's guys that come to mind, and I used PWG just as an example. I don't mean that disparagingly, because they're one of the best companies in the world, obviously. But I think of guys like Johnny Gargano, who I remember coming up with the first time around. We started around the same time originally. And I was wrestling in Cleveland as he had his first year in wrestling, and he was something even back then. But what I'm saying is, I commentated one of his matches in 2014 or 15 or something. Now, and it was a great match. But now put that up against, now all of a sudden he's having Dave Meltzer 5-star matches. Now what's the difference? The difference is he was with all these masters of their craft in NXT training behind the scenes, and he listened to all of them because he was an A-plus wrestler when he got there, and now he's an A+++++ wrestler because he was open. And I think that's one good thing about wrestling these days is there seems to be a lot of people who are very respectful and open to listen to things, and I'm definitely one of them. You know, I mean, I'll listen to anybody's perspective on my performance, and I'll find something of value that I can use. I mean, unless they're just a total jerk.
Yeah.
You know.
If you have nothing constructive to add to someone, I'm just like, be quiet. So how did you actually get involved with Capital? Had you heard of Capital before, or was it Matthew who reached out to you?
Yeah. I can't remember if I reached out to Matthew or he reached out to me. I know that they were having they were having a seminar with like a New Japan type of seminar, and that's kind of how we hooked up. And then you know, they had a problem originally with the date, you know, and I was just I'm always very kind to everybody. This is kind of my nature, but I've been a professional in the actual world, and I understand that a little kindness goes a long way. And, you know, of course, Matthew had the unenviable task the first time of being like, hey guys, sorry, you know, Mr. Carroll is sick. He's got the flu. You know, and I was just like, hey, man, you know, thank you so much. And I don't want a refund or anything on the seminar. I just let me know when you're redoing it, and I'd love to be there. Thank you. And he thanked me for being so nice and everything. And then we just kind of started having just random conversations online about like, oh, you know, just sharing things here and there. And all of a sudden he's like, hey, well, I'd love to have you up here sometime. And I was like, well, that's a coincidence because I'd love to be up there sometime. You know, and it just kind of worked like that. And it really is a testament to just, because I've seen people who are just like butt kissers, you know, and that gets people a long way, I guess, or it can, but I just don't have it in me. So what I do instead is I give everybody unlimited respect as much as I can, you know, unless they piss on it, and then oh well. But, you know, so he's one of them. And I'll be honest, I had no idea how involved Matthew was in booking anything. I was just being nice to somebody who I thought was a cool guy. You know, I was like, wow, we have a lot in common. And I was just enjoying talking to him. And I found that some of my greatest bookings have come from me just relating with people and not trying to get a booking, oddly enough. Like that's what happened with AIW. I wasn't John Thorne talked about on his podcast, and I kind of forgot about this, but what led to me getting booked up there was not me sending him a bunch of annoying emails. It was we ran into each other at a show, and we had never really talked before, and it was kind of a rough thing because Chandler Biggins, the co-promoter, was in the hospital and likely dying at the time. And I just went up to him and had a nice 20-minute conversation just as a human being and just felt for him because his best friend was in the hospital and one of my friends, you know, as well. And then I found out, like, you know, 4 months later, I get my phone rings and it's him. Hey, we got an idea. And I've been on every show they've run ever since, you know. So it just comes from just be a good person, you know, like just I think learning your craft is obviously incredibly important. And that's the backbone of everything. But beyond that, just be nice to people, you know, like just walk through this life with respect because everybody deserves your respect until they do something to not deserve it.
That's true. I would say the best thing in the world is being nice because it costs you nothing.
Well, and you get so much in return and so much, you know, I mean, if you can't do it for any other reason other than you just should, just remember how many things you could get out of just being kind to people. And it's just it opens so many doors, more doors than it closes for sure. And I just think that's an important thing for everybody to remember, you know, and just keep like I get messages, oddly enough, from people, you know, and they say some of the same things you said, like, oh my gosh, like how do I get good at like selling and facial expressions and how'd you come up with that character? And I'm like, listen, this character kind of came up with me, you know, like it's like John Lennon had a thing where he would talk about how he would sit at the piano for 6 hours and just bang his head against it and just write crap after crap after crap or nothing and just be frustrated. and he would finally give up, mad, get up, walk away from the piano, get halfway through making a sandwich, and then boom, a masterpiece would hit him. And he'd run back to the piano and he'd bang it all out and write it down. And he said that there's a certain process of that frustration of putting yourself out there for hours and hours and hours that is necessary to come up with great things, because it's like you're putting yourself out there to receive that frequency, that higher frequency of great art. And you have to suffer through the banging your head and not knowing what to do until finally it happens to you, And I say that with the characters. It's like, just keep going. I did 20 different types of characters before I landed on this, and now it feels like I don't even have to try. It's just so easy because it found me.
Absolutely. It's been a joy to talk to you. But before you go, I do want to ask you. I always ask everyone this: what do you see for 2018 for Magnum CK? And another question: what do you see? What do you hope is the legacy that you can bring to wrestling?
Oh wow, that's huge. Well, for 2018, I'm literally I'm just enjoying what I'm doing. I feel like I have a lot of really positive upswing momentum going right now in some places that are really important to me, and it's just that constant balance of not succumbing to what Roddy Piper calls the sickness of wrestling, where it takes over your life, So it's something I love, and I want to find that balance between having my life with my family and also doing the best I can in wrestling. So in 2018, I'm working that balance. I'm being the best husband that I can and being the best wrestler that I can at the same time, and all the other hats that I wear. So I'm going to continue doing what I do and kind of spreading around whatever it is I do in a more balanced way. Now, as far as what I want to leave behind in wrestling, I'm lucky in the sense that my goals genuinely this time around are personal ones, where it's like I want to feel a certain way. Before it was like, oh, well, I want to be the best, or I want to be this or that, or whatever champion. Now I'm thinking, I want to feel fulfilled. I want to feel that I've put forth my best effort, and I can someday have a stack of videos that I could pop in and watch 30 years from now and be like, man, that was crazy, that was funny or whatever, and just feel fulfilled. I want to, and I think more importantly than anything, Ric Flair, a long time ago, God, it's been 15 years ago now, wrote in his book, he said it in a couple speeches here and there, but he said that there's nothing in the world like the respect of your peers. And this time around in wrestling, I think I'm doing my best, and I think I'm being relatively successful at earning the respect of all my peers and being looked at someone that can be trusted or can be counted on to give 100% and deliver and just be a nice guy. Donovan Danhausen said this at a show recently. He's like, you're just as good to have backstage as you are out in the show, so that's what I like. I like to be a positive presence. And when I'm gone from wrestling, I just want people, if they remember me at all, to be like, man, I miss having that guy in the locker room. Like, what a nice guy. And I think that would be enough for me.
You're so nice. It's annoying. Like, I'm sitting here with like a grin on my face. I literally just, like, behind the scenes, just messaged Matthew on Messenger. I'm not even kidding. I was just like, he's so nice.
Well,
he's like, he's so positive. I literally just wrote like the most positive person ever.
You just have all you have are your feelings, and I see a lot of bitter people. Not a lot, but I see some bitter people in wrestling, and I'm like, man, you're looking outside of yourself for the answers, but the answers are all inside, So just walk forward with positivity, and that's all you can do.
With positivity, we all want to watch wrestling and enjoy it and be a part of it, and like, let's just all be positive. It's the coolest thing in the world. It's the weirdest thing in the world, but it's the coolest thing in the world. So for anyone who's listening to this, where can people follow you on social media or get your merch?
Mostly Twitter and Instagram. It's at the Magnum CK, because apparently there's another Magnum CK that's not a wrestler, but I don't know. He stole the name before I could get it. So it's at the Magnum CK. And I really just have my merchandise, my shirts and stuff at the shows. If people ever want anything, I get emails from people once in a while. I'm more than happy to send something out to you if you decide you want something. But I really just want to get people out to the shows. So that's why I try to keep all my merchandise at the shows as much as I can.
Awesome. I hope to see you at the Capitol soon and to officially meet you. Thank you very, very much for taking the time out to do the podcast, to do the interviews. I really, really appreciate it.
Absolutely my pleasure. Anytime, my friend.
All right. Thank you very much. Thank you to Magnum CK for the interview here at Capitol Wrestling. And thank you very much, citizens of the Capitol.
All right, everybody. Great interview. Magnum CK. Obviously, it takes a lot to take that name on. Obviously, Magnum CK makes you think Magnum TA. And so to me, I think that's what's really cool about him is he's not afraid to fly in the face of history here. And I think he's going to blaze his own path, and I'm very excited to see what the future holds for him.
Absolutely, especially, to hear from someone who did wrestling back in the early 2000s, left to do theater, and has come back and been more successful in his return in the past 2.5 years than he was in the original 5 years he wrestled. Like, that's a great story. That's someone that really kind of found their footing and someone who figured out who they were as a person. And it's really, really uplifting. And he might be the most positive person I've ever spoken to. Just nothing but joy and nothing but positive, and it was really, really cool.
Absolutely. Speaking of things that were cool this week, Darnell, I know you saw Infinity War. Is that correct?
I did. I officially saw it on Monday night.
I have seen it 3 times already. And no spoilers for anybody who's listening. We will have a spoiler review of that coming out here later this week on the No Coast Nerd. But to me, that movie reminded me of what professional wrestling is all about. When you build up the strong villain, you build up a team of people that you want to root for, you build up the babyface. And I think we take for granted the connection that's between comic books and professional wrestling sometimes. And all I could think about when I was watching this movie was the professional wrestling aspects of it. And to me, that's why, because you look at how successful this movie is, that's why professional wrestling continues to be as successful as it is, because it's basic. It's a formula that works. And that's one of the things, to tie this all back in. Obviously, I just wanted to get a cheap plug in for the No Coast Nerd, but to tie it all back in, that's what Capitol Wrestling's about. It's about that simple formula for a new generation, a new age. And so everything I loved about Infinity War is everything I love about Capitol Wrestling.
Absolutely. That's a good analogy. I can't wait to speak about it on this week's No Coast Nerd.
There's a lot to unpack.
Yeah, you're going to be surprised by some of the things I have to say, I'm sure. You always are.
I always am. You come out of left field all the time. Darnell, is there anything else you want to get out there to the citizens of the Capitol before we sign off for today?
Absolutely. One last thing. If you haven't heard, speaking of comic books, make sure you look out, go to Amazon, get To Be the Man, the graphic novel, episode 2, or volume 2, chapter 2. There's a word I was looking for, and I couldn't find it, and it was chapter. So chapter 2 has officially come out. They had copies at the last show. The first chapter was amazing. I love it. I need to get chapter 2. Please go support Jared Davis, who has done a great job doing the writing for this fantastic graphic novel. Please go support To Be the Man. And yeah, thanks.
Darnell, where can we find you on social media?
You can find me on Instagram at Slay_Wyatt. You can also follow me on Twitter at DNLicious, and follow my other podcast, The Queer Nerd. That's nerd with a Z, also on Twitter.
We should have a big episode of The Queer Nerd coming up here in just the next few days. I'm finishing up the editing process for you on that one, but do you want to tell everybody who your next guest is?
Yeah, it'd actually be Effie, who is a fantastic wrestler based out of Florida. And he is, like myself, of the homosexual tendencies. But it's really shady. You are going to need an umbrella if you are listening to this podcast, for sure.
Well, and we'll be back on Friday with the Pro Wrestling Mothership as well, talking about the greatest Royal Rumble. But you know what was greater? Mystery Dream Match 3000, without question. You can find me on Twitter at Smohawk, same thing on Instagram, and make sure you're following Capital Wrestling on Twitter at Capital Wrestling. That's Capital with an O, no G on wrestling, so Capital Wrestling. Follow them on Facebook and on Instagram. Make sure you're subscribed on YouTube and on Twitch to make sure you don't miss any of the action from the Capitol. So for the citizens of the Capitol, for the performers in the Capitol, and of course for myself and Darnell, we wish you all a great week. We'll see you next time. Stay cool, Capitol. Stay cool.